Is this gonna be a fucking dragon or something? Oh, fuck no! Fuck!
Oh no! What is happening?
Oh god! Oh god! Oh god! Oh god! Oh god! It's coming for me! It's coming for me!
He got the strap.
So he was fighting off something in the fucking thing.
Comes back alive. That's right when I started talking.
Ah!
Oh no! What? Why are you leaving?
Holy shit!
Ah! Jesus fucking Christ!
This is fucking roll. Like, this is.
Hello. First things first, I didn't do something. Audio output. Desktop audio. Yay, now we have music. That's embarrassing. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Daring Player Squad. My name is James, and welcome to a very special Halloween episode where the game that I wanted to play doesn't come out until tomorrow, and I need to do something today. Luckily, Mike Flanagan has a new show on Netflix, so I'm very strongly inspired tonight. So we are going to read a whole bunch of Edgar Allan Poe stories, most of which I know of, but I've never actually read myself, so this will be quite fun. what can I say? Fall of the House of Usher. Ash and I finished it last night. We stayed up till about 1:30 to get every single episode in. I figured, oh, we'll just leave 2 more and we'll go to bed at a reasonable time. We did not do well at that, so we kept going. Quite good, very good, very good. Really enjoyed it. It's fun to see all of the usual cast of these shows in new roles as just absolute monsters and douchebags. So I could recommend, but you know, it was a cute show because while overall they were playing the main narrative of the fall of the House of Usher ish, more than not, almost every episode was like themed after a different story or poem, and all the characters are named as such after specific characters from the different stories. So it's very cute, and I want to learn more. So we're just gonna get into it, and hopefully, as people come in, you guys can pick up pretty easily where we go, or where we are, and can we just roll with it. On that, you know, we'll just have a chill night, just read a few stories. I don't know how many we'll read, maybe 3, maybe 4, depending on how long they are. I feel like we should be able to get through them pretty well, but you know, it should be okay. So, and of course, the short version, Edgar Allan Poe, of course, a very famous American author from the early 1800s. Wrote a whole lot of stories that have been very influential over the course of time and literature. He more or less invented the detective genre, and you know, he invented he made popular the idea of like writing in code in stories. I don't think we'll read that one today, though. But yeah, he's a fun guy. It's like he's one of those ones where everyone's like in high school, oh, whatever, I read the story, I read that story. It's like big deal. But you know, he's written a lot more than just those ones. Reading for Halloween, I've definitely done this a few times previous years. A couple of them I've actually written stories as well. I did not have time to write anything because I wasn't planning on reading anything this year. So maybe next time. But I have definitely read a few Edgar Allan Poe stories before. Previous years I read The Telltale Heart because I had high school memories of that one. The last time I did this, I read The Cask of Amontillado. Rashi was really excited to hear that one, which again, I got very excited when, you know, the my Flanagan show came out, and it's like, oh, their company's name is Fortunato. Oh, very good, very good. So that's funny. So anyways, we're all settled in. We've got a nice comfy long sleeve. We've got a glass of red. So I think kind of because of the show, I have a few stories that I'd like to see more than not. So we're gonna start with this one. Text, where are you? There you are. Properties. Nope, that is not what I want. I want the text. There you are. You bastard. So this was from 1845, and the actual story is called The Black Cat. Alright. So I had to like very quickly get this stream theme back up and running. I had it before, back when we used a different software than OBS. So that's probably why I forgot to put audio on it. Anyway, so what do we have here? So we have we got about 2 hours of oh, Actually, I really can't use this music. I should stop using this music. This is not royalty free at all. I'm gonna get in trouble. Like, oh, this one's nice and there's no ads. Like, no, this is not gonna work. Alright, how about you?
Sensitive teeth and gum.
The fact that there's ads already, that's gonna be a problem. Actually, we should use Spotify. Actually, no, Spotify's not gonna work either. Let's see. Haunted lo-fi. No copyright Halloween lo-fi beats. Actually, wait, this might work. This is a bit too much, but you know what? We can roll with this. All right, the audio's about that. And there we are. Okay. This feels like not quite the right mood for this. No. No, we can't use a Halloween lo-fi. That would be wrong. Let's see. Actually, is there lives? I don't know if it's safe to listen to that though. Let's see. How about you? Buy my music here. Nope. Nope, that's not going to work at all. You know what? I guess we're just gonna have to go with the lo-fi hip-hop mix. That's ads. Let's see if there's anything else. Man, I found these so easily previous, and I guess that's just not a thing anymore. Scary place. It's like, I don't trust you. Alright, well, I think we got another. Okay. This is probably good enough. Again, it's a little it's not quite right, but you know what, we'll roll with it. Okay. Oh my gosh. It's so funny. Okay. Alright, let's see what happens. I've been messing around with this long enough. So, starting off, now that we've got that out of the way, let us begin tonight with The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. This is going to be so distracting, this is music. No, we can't do this. We can't do this. We're going back to the other one. Ads, you need to stop. I definitely only decided this like midway through this day that I was just gonna read stories instead. Who knew? Which playlist will get me in the least amount of trouble? Let's try this one. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Here we go. The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. For the most wild, yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I expect neither nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it, in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad am I not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world, plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many they will seem less terrible than Baroque's. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace. Some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive, in the circumstances I detail with awe, nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. From my infancy I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and, in my manhood, I derived it from one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature of the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I married early, and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black, and sagacious to an astonishing degree. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than it happens, just now, to be remembered. Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted, in this manner, for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend Intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew, day by day, more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? And at length even Pluto, who was now becoming old, and consequently somewhat peevish, Even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home, much intoxicated, from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, when, in his fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed, at once, to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder, while I pen the damnable atrocity. When reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse, for the crime of which I had been guilty. But it was, at best, a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation. And then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of the spirit philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not more sure my soul lives than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of the indivisible primary faculties or sentiments which give direction to the character of man. Who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or silly action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination, in the teeth of our best judgment, to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such? This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning, in cool blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes, and with the bitterest remorse in my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in doing so I was committing a sin. A deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. On the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish the sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts, and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to its having been recently spread. About this wall a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The words "strange," "singular," and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length, reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, this garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, by some of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown, through an open window, into my chamber. This had probably been done with the view of arousing me from sleep. The falling of other walls had compressed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portraiture as I saw it. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and, during this period, there came back into my spirit a half-sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me, among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented, for another pet of the same species, and of somewhat similar appearance, with which to supply its place. One night as I sat, half stupefied, in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object, reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin, or of rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it, and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat. A very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I at once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it. I had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and, when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When I reached the house, it domesticated itself at once, and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated. But, I know not how or why it was, its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature. A certain sense of shame, and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty, preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence, as from the breath of a pestilence. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the beast, was the discovery, on the morning after I brought it home, that, like Pluto, it also had been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed in a high degree that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait, and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity, which it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair, or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and thus nearly throw me down, or, fastening its long and sharp claws in my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from so doing, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss of how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon cell, I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of white hair, of which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had at length assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name, and for this, above all, I loathed and dreaded, and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a hideous, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows. Oh, mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime, of agony and death. And now was I indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast, whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed. A brute beast to work out for me a man. Hey. Hey. No killer whales. Awkward. So awkward. So now I was indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast whose fellow is contemptuously destroyed. A brute beast to work out for me a man, fashioned in this image of the high God. So much of insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night I knew the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and, in the latter, I started, hourly, from dreams of unutterable fear, to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent eternally upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while, from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. That's normal, they're just hungry in the morning. Sleep with the door closed. But then they won't then they won't cuddle with you though, and that's so good. But I guess if they're like absolute bitches, then what can you do? Hello, Ace. One day she accompanied me, upon some household errand, into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and, nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness. Uplifting an axe, and forgetting, in my wrath, the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal, which, of course, would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded, by the interference, into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot, without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, and with entire deliberation, to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar. Again, I deliberated about casting it in the well in the yard, about packing it in a box, as if merchandise, with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. Wow, you got a lot of the same story beats. That's why you got to line the trunk with plastic. Jesus. That's funny. Hello, Roger. How are you? Let's realize that we don't need to hide the messages, so we're gonna just turn that back on. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed. How's friend James? Doing okay. Did anyone check Poe's cellar walls when he died? I was trying to think he was trying to tell us something. What if? Shit. No, I'm doing good. I was just saying earlier, the game that I was intending to stream for this month doesn't come out till tomorrow, so I'm just gonna fill it with Mike Flanagan inspired content. I can feel like a bit of a cough creeping. That's no good. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection, caused by a false chimney or fireplace that had been filled up, and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the hole up as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and, having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position, while, with little trouble, I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, and hair, with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, "Here at least, then, my labor has not been in vain." My next step was to look for the beast which had been a cause of so much wretchedness, for I had, at length, firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet it at the moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe, or to imagine, the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came out. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster, in terror, had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came, very unexpectedly, into the house, and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not in a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say but one word by way of triumph, and to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. "Gentlemen," I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, "I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health, and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house." In the rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. "I may say an excellently well-constructed house. These walls... Are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together." And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily, with a cane which I held in my hand, upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of the wife of my bosom. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the archfiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by the voice from within the tomb. By a cry, at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman. A howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony and of the demons that exult in their damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant, the party upon the stairs remained motionless, though extremity of terror and of awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clogged with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. He fucked up. So that's how that goes. It carries out a little differently on Fall of the House of Usher. But cool. Cool. Yeah. But yeah, if I didn't say it earlier properly, hello Ace, Roger. Hope you guys are doing well. Yeah, we just reading some stories. Yeah, Fall of the House of Usher was good. We were up till 1:30 last night finishing it. We just like we started watching it like, oh, this is good. We need to keep reading it. We need to keep watching it. Also, I'm tired. Alright, so let's see. What to read next? I think I had a short list of 3 that I wanted to read. So let's see. Mask. I wanted to read Mask. Yeah, so I'm on a site. It's poststories.com straight up. This one should be fun. And again, I just compare it to what I watched on the show just to see how it goes. So I think this could be a fun one. I say fun, literally a story about plague. Yes, I think we'll do this. So we need to change the story title. No. The text box. There we go. So we are going to. Also, I've got to be able to find a better playlist than this one. Like, where's the ones that I listened to last year? I know I listened to a bunch previous years. Let's see.
I have one I can maybe send to you.
Okay.
That's really good. That I like.
Okay. Ash might have a hookup.
Let me just check.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Let's see. What Ash did he give us? But first, ads. Alright, let's see here. Alright, Breaking Bad, get out of here. Oh, no, not yet. Songs for you to drink blood to. Vampire aesthetic background music songs.
It's pretty good.
Nice.
Spooky.
Okay. This should be safe enough.
Yeah.
Ah, yeah, this will be good. All right. So this is 1850. So 5 years after he wrote The Black Cat, he wrote this one. The Mask of the Red Death. Did it fit? Yeah, it did. Alright. Mask of the Red Death. Summary. The Red Death is a plague which has killed off half of the population. Prince Prospero gathers 1,000 people from the knights and royalty. They seal themselves off from the rest of the world in an extensive castle, but in an attempt to separate themselves from the horrible conditions on the outside. But can they escape the Red Death? This is basically the we are rich and we are going to survive the zombie apocalypse. Sagacious. All right. So this is our next story. Judging by the scrolly bar, this should be about the same length as the previous. So these are all good sized stories, like reasonable length. So we can get through a few of them. Yeah, that's pretty good. All right. All right. So there's a prince. What kind of prince? His name is Prospero. Is he Italian? Does Prospero make sense to be Italian? Let's see. Okay. I think they're Italian. Alright. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal. The redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to keep the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They had resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve, or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori. There were improvisatori, and there were ballet dancers. There were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these in security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it had opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum, amid the profusion of golden ornaments that had lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers, but in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod, bearing a brazier of fire, that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illumined the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment, also, that there also stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause, momentarily, in their performance, to hearken to the sound. And thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief discontent of the whole gay company. And, while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, the next chiming of the clock should produce within them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock. And then were the same disconcert and tumultuousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were particular. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decor of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed, in great part, the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers, upon occasion of this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has since been seen in Hernani. They were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. They were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. They were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. And these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And, anon, there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet. And then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They've endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the masquerers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, Kosten, hello, how you doing? We're describing the sick bomb shelter that we made to survive the plague. Lunchtime at work, nice. Yeah, come listen if you'd like. I think people are gonna start dying soon. Maybe we'll find out. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, that comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirlingly on until at length they recommenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock. And thus it happened, perhaps, that more of the thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise. Then, finally, of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so clearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the types of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next, his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince. See, masking doesn't work. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who, at the moment, was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. or from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and, while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the rest, though the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. To the window. You know, I thought that in my head too. It was Coastal behind the mask, the first to hang for DPS sins. Oh, you think you're the first to... Oh, we'll see. Is Coastal the first to hang for DPS sins? Oh, maybe. Green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached, in rapid impetuosity, to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted this pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which, instantly afterwards, fell prostrate in the death of the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and, seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at the finding of the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of the revel, and died each in their despairing posture of his fall. And life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. So actually, Coastal was not the first to hang for the sins, but was the first to start killing everyone else. Because someone didn't social distance, I guess. Have you guys watched any of the Fall of the House of Usher yet? On Netflix, the new show? Oh, so good. So good, right? That's funny. It has a it has a noticeably less sad ending compared to some of the previous ones. The episode I left off was the nightclub. Oh, so the Mask of the Red Death is the last thing you saw. Hey. Oh, this is a jaunty tune. Yeah, there's just it doesn't slow down after that. Actually, there's one thing that was amazing on very fitting. I mean, it's very funny because a friend of mine in Kansas, Kansas Molly, she was saying episode 3 is the one that really snagged her, and it wasn't from the ending of the episode. It was from the bit where Roderick talks about the when life gives you lemons, and she was just like, this is the best scene of like the year. So if you haven't seen it yet, Follow the House of Usher, episode 3. When people start talking about when life gives you lemons, oh, you're in for a treat. You're in for a great treat. Lovely. Let's see, what other instances from that show have inspired me to want to read stuff? Let's see. That's Steam, not Steam. I need Discord. What else did I suggest during Discord? I suggested I would look at Pendulum. I wanted to read Pendulum. Do we read Pendulum now, or do we save Pendulum a little bit later? Honestly, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to go. I'm actually noticeably quite tired right now. I'm feeling Pendulum. Let's see. What else would be fun? Oh, Fall of the House of Usher. Actually, how long is Fall of the House of Usher? This one's longer. Yeah, maybe I'll read that if I can make it. Or, I never heard of this one. You know what? Let's read this one first. This summary, this log line has got me hooked. So, this is a story called Hop Frog. A midget seeks revenge. Are you looking for a short story about a crippled midget who seeks revenge on those who mistreat him and make fun of him? This is that story. And it was written almost 200 years before Game of Thrones. Also, I'm gonna just read the words as they are on the screen. And we will acknowledge that this is a 200-year-old story, and therefore maybe not the right terminology that we would use now. That said, I would love to see someone seek revenge on those that mistreat him. I think that would be great. I need to know. Alright. So, we're gonna go to 1849. And we're going to go to Hop Frog. Okay. All right. Reload. Yeah, it's like I got wine so that I could deglaze a pan. I'm like, I'm gonna make meat again. This is like, what's that? 30% off? Quick sell. Sounds good. All right. So this is a little bit longer than the other ones, but that's not too much more. Actually, how long is Pendulum? It's a story that was long enough that they were able to make several movies out of it. Oh, this is also quite long. All right. Man, 1850 was just like the year he just had it all figured out. Oh my god, that one's longer. All right. No, we're doing Hop Frog. We're doing Hop Frog. All right. All right. Where are we in the world? Where are we? What voice do I need to read this story? Huh. Grand Saloon. Okay. Let us assume we are in the old country. Alright. So, this is Hop Frog by Edgar Allan Poe. I never knew anyone so keenly alive to a joke as the king was. He seemed to live only for joking. To tell a good story of the joke, kind, and to tell it well, was the surest road to his favor. Thus it happened that his 7 ministers were all noted for their accomplishments as jokers. They all took after the king, too, in being large, corpulent, oily men, as well as inimitable jokers. Whether people grow fat by joking, or whether there is something in fat itself which predisposes to a joke, I have never been quite able to determine. but certain it is that a lean joker is a rara avis in terris. About the refinements, or as he called them, the ghost of wit, the king troubled himself very little. He had an especial admiration for breadth in a jest, and would often put up with length for the sake of it. Over-niceties wearied him. He would have preferred Rabelais' Gargantua to the Zadig of Voltaire, and, upon the whole, practical jokes suited his taste far better than verbal ones. Oily man, hey man, whatever suits your fancy. At the date of my narrative, professing jesters had not altogether gone out of fashion at court. Several of the great continental powers still retained their fools, who wore motley with caps and bells, and who were expected to be always ready with sharp witticisms at a moment's notice in consideration of the crumbs that fell from the royal table. Our king, as a matter of course, retained his fool. The fact is, he required something in the way of folly, if only to counterbalance the heavy wisdom of the 7 wise men who were his ministers, not to mention himself. His fool, or professional jester, was not only a fool, however. His value was trebled in the eyes of the king, by the fact of his being also a dwarf and a cripple. Dwarfs were as common at court in those days as fools, and many monarchs would have found it difficult to get through their days are rather longer at court than elsewhere, without both a jester to laugh with and a dwarf to laugh at. But, as I've already observed, your jesters, in 99 cases out of 100, are fat, round, and unwieldy. So that it was no small source of self-gratulation with our king that, in Hopfrog, this was the fool's name, he possessed a triplicate treasure in one person. I believe the name Hopfrog was not that given to the dwarf by his sponsors at baptism, but it was conferred upon him, by general consent of the several ministers, on account of his inability to walk as other men do. In fact, Hopfrog could only get along by a sort of interjectional gait, something between a leap and a wriggle, a movement that afforded illimitable amusement, and of course consolation to the king, for, notwithstanding the protuberance of his stomach and a constitutional swelling of the head, the king, by his whole court, was accounted a capital figure. But although Hopfrog, through the distortion of his legs, could move only with great pain and difficulty along a road or floor, the prodigious muscular power which nature seemed to have bestowed upon his arms, by way of compensation for deficiency in the lower limbs, enabled him to perform many feats of wonderful dexterity, where trees or ropes were in question, or anything else to climb. As such exercises, he certainly much more resembled a squirrel, or a small monkey, than a frog. I am not able to say with precision from what country Hopfrog originally came. It was from some barbarous region, however, that no person had ever heard of. Can't toss an oily man very far. A vast distance from the court of our king. Hopfrog and a young girl, very little less dwarfish than himself, although of exquisite proportions and a marvelous dancer, had been forcibly carried off from their respective homes in adjoining provinces, and sent as presents to the king by one of his ever-victorious generals. Under these circumstances, it is not to be wondered at that... hold on. My chair fell down. My chair fell down. Nowadays, we call that a short stack. We call it a shorty. Under these circumstances, it is not to be wondered at that a close intimacy arose between the two little captives. Oh, God. Can't we just use the slipperiness as lubrication for some sort of launching device? Gross. Indeed, they soon became sworn friends. Hopfrog, who, although he made a great deal of sport, was by no means popular, had it not in his power to render Trippetta... Hey, ads. Oi. Oi. None of that. Easy there, playlist. We don't need to know about BC Hydro right now. Go away. Off you go. Yeah, get. Very good. Indeed, they soon became sworn friends. Hopfrog, who, although he made a great deal of sport, was by no means popular, had it not in his power to render Trippetta many services. But she, on account of her grace and exquisite beauty, although a dwarf, was universally admired and petted, so she possessed much influence, and never failed to use it, whenever she could, for the benefit of Hopfrog. On some grand state occasion, I forget what, the king determined to have a masquerade, and whenever a masquerade or anything of that kind occurred at our court, then the talents both of Hopfrog and Trippetta were sure to be called into play. Hopfrog, in especial, was so inventive in the way of getting up pageants, suggesting novel characters, and arranging costumes for masked balls, that nothing could be done, it seems, without his assistance. The night appointed for the fete had arrived. A gorgeous hall had been fitted up, under Trippetta's eyes, with every kind of device which could possibly give eclat to a masquerade. The whole court was in fever of expectation. As for costumes and characters, it might be well supposed that everybody had come to a decision on such points. Many had made up their minds as to what roles they should assume, a week or even a month in advance. And, in fact, there was not a particle of indecision anywhere, except in the case of the king and the 7 ministers. Why they hesitated I never could tell, unless they did it by way of a joke. More probably, they found it difficult, on account of being so fat, to make up their minds. At all events, time flew, and as a last resort, they sent for Trippetta and Hopfrog. When the 2 little friends obeyed the summons of the king, they found him sitting at his wine with the 7 members of his cabinet council. But the monarch appeared to be in very ill humor. He knew that Hopfrog was not fond of wine, for it excited the poor cripple almost to madness, and madness is no comfortable feeling. But the king loved his practical jokes and took pleasure in forcing Hopfrog to drink and, as the king called it, to be merry. The path of leisures, oh god. Come here, Hopfrog, said he, as the jester and his friend entered the room. Swallow this bumper to the health of your absent friends. Here Hopfrog sighed. And then let us have the benefit of your invention. We want characters. Characters, man! Something novel, out of the way. We are wearied with this everlasting sameness. Come, drink. The wine will brighten your wits. Alright, Coulson. Have a good day for the rest of your night at work. Take it easy. I'll talk to you soon. Picturing Zap Brannigan and Kif. Hopfrog endeavored, as usual, to get up a jest in reply to these advances from the king. But the effort was too much. It happened to be the poor dwarf's birthday, and the command to drink to his absent friends forced the tears to his eyes. Many large bitter drops fell into the goblet as he took it, humbly, from the hand of the tyrant. Ah, ha, ha! Roared the latter as the dwarf reluctantly drained the beaker. See what a glass of good wine can do! Why, your eyes are shining already! Poor fellow. His large eyes gleamed rather than shone, for the effect of wine on his excitable brain was not more powerful than instantaneous. He placed the goblet nervously on the table, and looked round upon the company with a half-insane stare. They all seemed highly amused at the success of the king's joke. And now to business, said the Prime Minister, a very fat man. Yes, said the king. Come lend us your assistance. Characters, my fine fellow. We stand in need of characters. All of us. Ha 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 ha. And as this was seriously meant for a joke, his laugh was chorused by the 7. Hopfrog also laughed, although feebly and somewhat vacantly. Come, come, said the king, impatiently. Have you nothing to suggest? I'm endeavoring to think of something novel, replied the dwarf, abstractly, for he knew he was quite bewildered by the wine. Endeavoring, cried the tyrant, fiercely. What do you mean by that? Ah, I perceive. You are sulky and want more wine. Here, drink this. And he poured out another goblet full and offered it to the cripple, who merely gazed at it, gasping for breath. Drink, I say, shouted the monster, or by the fiends! The dwarf hesitated. The king grew purple with rage. The courtiers smirked. Trippetta, pale as a corpse, advanced to the monarch's seat, and, falling on her knees before him, implored him to spare her friend. The tyrant regarded her for some moments, in evident wonder at her audacity. He seemed quite at a loss of what to do or say, how most becomingly to express his indignation. At last, without uttering a syllable, he pushed her violently from him, and threw the contents of the brimming goblet in her face. The poor girl got up as she could, and, not daring even to sigh, resumed her position at the foot of the table. There was a dead silence for about half a minute, during which the falling of a leaf or of a feather might have been heard. It was interrupted by a low, but harsh and protracted grating sound which seemed to come at once from every corner of the room. What are you making that noise for? Demanded the king, turning furiously to the dwarf. The latter seemed to have recovered, in great measure, from his intoxication, and looking fixedly but quietly in the tyrant's face, merely ejaculated, I? How could it have been me? The sound appeared to come from the without, observed one of the courtiers. Wrong voice. I fancy it was the parrot at the window, wetting his bill upon his gauge wires. True, replied the monarch, as if much relieved by the suggestion. But, on the honor of a knight, I could have sworn that it was the gritting of this vagabond's teeth. Don't forget to vote for my next game. Oh, yeah, we do need to vote for Colson's next game. This is true. Hereupon the dwarf laughed. The king was too confirmed a joker to object to anyone's laughing, and displayed a set of large, powerful, and very repulsive teeth. Moreover, he avowed his perfect willingness to swallow as much wine as desired. The monarch was pacified, and having drained another bumper with no very perceptible ill effect, Hopfrog entered at once, and with spirit, into the plans for the masquerade. Ejaculated as a synonym for spoke is easily among the funniest age conventions of classical literature. It really is. Also, how gay everything was in the last story. Also, I haven't said it yet. Lancer, good evening. Hello. Glad to see you. Always glad. Lancer always comes up for story time, and that's why Lancer's awesome. I don't know if you guys know this. Lancer always come up for story time. I appreciate this very much. I cannot tell what was the association of our idea, observed he, very tranquilly, and as if he had never tasted wine in his life. But just after your majesty had struck a girl down and thrown the wine in her face, just after your majesty had done this, and while the parrot was making that odd noise outside the window, there came into my mind a capital diversion, when my own country frolics, often enacted among us, at our masquerades. But here it will be new altogether. Unfortunately, however, it requires a company of 8 persons, and "Here we are!" cried the king, laughing at his acute discovery of the coincidence. 8 to a fraction! I and my 7 ministers. Come, what is the diversion? We call it, replied the cripple, the 8-chain orangutans, and it really is excellent sport if well enacted. We will enact it, remarked the king, drawing himself up and lowering his eyelids. The beauty of the game, continued Hopfrog, lies in the fright it occasions among the women. Capital! Roared in chorus the monarch and his ministry. I will equip you as orangutans, proceeded the dwarf. Leave all that to me. The resemblance will be so striking, the company of masqueraders will take you for real beasts, and of course, they will be as much terrified as astonished. Oh, this is exquisite, exclaimed the king. Hopfrog, I will make a man of you. Whoa. The chains are for the purpose of increasing the confusion by their jangling. You're supposed to have escaped en masse from your keepers. Your Majesty cannot conceive the effect produced at a masquerade by 8-chain orangutans, imagined to be real ones by most of the company, and rushing in with savage cries among the crowd of delicately and gorgeously habited men and women. The contrast is inimitable. Inimitable. It must be, said the king, and the council arose hurriedly, as it was growing late, to put in execution of the scheme of Hopfrog. His mode of equipping the party as orangutans was very simple, but effective enough for his purposes. The animals in question had, at the epoch of my story, very rarely been seen in any part of the civilized world, and as the imitations made by the dwarf were sufficiently beast-like and more than sufficiently hideous, their truthfulness to the nature was thus thought to be secured.
I need to catch up. I'm getting drunk.
Well, you don't have to drink all of it. This is like
I know.
It's like 2 bottles worth of wine.
I know, but I was like, do.
Bijou and Yukon.
I was having lots of glasses.
Well then. Cheers, y'all.
Cheers.
The king and his ministers were first encased in tight-fitting stockinette shirts and drawers. They were then saturated with tar. At this stage of the process, some one of the party suggested feathers, but the suggestion was at once overruled by the dwarf, who soon convinced the 8, by ocular demonstration, that the hair of such a brute as the orangutan was much more efficiently represented by flax. A thick coating of the latter was accordingly plastered upon the coating of the tar. A long chain was now procured. First, it was passed about the waist of the king, then tied, then about another of the party, and also tied, then about all successively in the same manner. When this chaining arrangement was complete, and the party stood as far apart from each other as possible, they formed a circle, and to make all things appear natural, Hop Frog passed the residue of the chain in 2 diameters, at right angles across the circle, after the fashion adopted, at the present day, by those who capture chimpanzees or other large apes in Borneo. The grand saloon in which the masquerade was to take place was a circular room, very lofty, and receiving the light of the sun only through a single window at top. At night, the season for which the apartment was especially designed, it was illuminated principally by a large chandelier, depending by a chain from the center of the skylight, and lowered, or elevated, by means of a counterbalance as usual. But, in order not to look unsightly, this latter passed outside the cupola and over the roof. The arrangements of the room had been left to Trippetta's superintendence, but, in some particulars it seems, she had been guided by the calmer judgment of her friend the dwarf. At his suggestion it was that, on this occasion, the chandelier was removed. Its waxen drippings, which, in weather so warm, it was quite impossible to prevent, would have been seriously detrimental to the rich dresses of the guests, who, on account of the crowded state of the saloon, could not all be expected to keep from out of its center, that is to say, from under the chandelier. Additional sconces were set in various parts of the hall, out of the wall, and a flambeau, emitting sweet odor, was placed in the right hand of each of the caryatides that stood against the wall, some 50 or 60 altogether. The 8 orangutans, taking Hop Frog's advice, waited patiently until midnight, when the room was thoroughly filled with masqueraders. This playlist knows what's up, before making their appearance. No sooner had the clocks ceased striking, however, than they rushed, or rather rolled in altogether, for the impediments of their chains caused most of the party to fall, and all to stumble as they entered. The excitement among the masqueraders was prodigious, and filled the heart of the king with glee. As had been anticipated, there were not a few of the guests who supposed the ferocious-looking creatures to be beasts of some kind in reality, if not precisely orangutans. Many of the women swooned with affright, and had not the king taken the precaution to exclude all weapons from the saloon, his party might have soon expiated their frolic in their blood. Expiated. That's a fantastic word. As it was, a general rush was made for the doors, but the king had ordered them to be locked immediately upon his entrance, and, at the dwarf's suggestion, the keys had been deposited with him. While the tumult was at its height, and each masquerader attentively only to his own safety, for, in fact, there was much real danger from the pressure of the exciting crowd, the chain by which the chandelier ordinarily hung, and which had been drawn up on its removal, might have been seen very gradually to descend, until its hooked extremity came within 3 feet of the floor. Soon after this, the king and his 7 friends, having reeled about the hall in all directions, found themselves at length in its center, and, of course, in immediate contact with the chain. While they were thus situated, the dwarf, who had followed noiselessly at their heels, incited them to keep up the commotion, took hold of their own chain at the intersection of the 2 portions which crossed the circle diametrically and at right angles. Here, with the rapidity of thought, he inserted the hook from which the chandelier had been wont to depend, and, in an instant, by some unseen agency, the chandelier chain was drawn so far upward as to take the hook out of reach, and, as an inevitable consequence, to drag the orangutans together in close connection, and face to face. The masqueraders, by this time, had recovered, in some measure, from their alarm, and, beginning to regard the whole matter as a well-contrived pleasantry, set up a loud shout of laughter at the predicament of the apes. "Leave 'em to me!" now screamed Hop Frog, his shrill voice making itself easily heard through all the din. "Leave 'em to me! I fancy I know them. If I can only get a good look at them, I can soon tell who they are." Here, scrambling over the heads of the crowd, he managed to get to the wall, when, seizing a flambeau from one of the caryatides, he returned, as he went, to the center of the room, leaping, with the agility of a monkey, upon the king's head, and then clambered a few feet up the chain, holding down the torch to examine the group of orangutans, and still screaming, "I shall soon find out who they are!" And now, while the whole assembly, the apes included, were convulsed with laughter, the jester suddenly uttered a shrill whistle, and the chain flew violently up for about 30 feet, wrong accent, dragging with it the dismayed and struggling orangutans, and leaving them suspended in midair between the skylight and the floor. Hopfrog, clinging to the chain as it rose, still maintained his relative position in respect to the 8 maskers, and still, as if nothing were the matter, continued to thrust his torch down toward them as though endeavoring to discover who they were. So thoroughly astonished was the whole company at his ascent that a dead silence of about a minute's duration ensued. It was broken by such a low, harsh, grating sound as had before attracted the attention of the king and his counselors when the former threw the wine in the face of Trippetta. But, on the present occasion, there could be no question as to whence the sound issued. It came from the fang-like teeth of the dwarf, who ground them and gnashed them as he foamed at the mouth, and glared with the expression of maniacal rage into the upturned countenances of the king and his 7 companions. "Aha!" said at length the infuriated jester. "Aha! I begin to see who these people are now." Here, pretending to scrutinize the king more closely, he held the flambeau to the flaxen coat which enveloped him, and which instantly burst into a sheet of vivid flame. In less than half a minute, the whole 8 orangutans were blazing fiercely, amid the shrieks of the multitude who gazed at them from below, horror-stricken, and without the power to render them the slightest assistance. At length, the flames, suddenly increasing in virulence, forced the jester to climb higher up the chain to be out of their reach, and, as he made his movement, the crowd again sank, for a brief instant, into silence. The dwarf seized his opportunity, and once more spoke. "I now see distinctly," he said, "what manner of people these maskers are. They are a great king and his 7 privy councillors, a king who does not scruple to strike a defenseless girl, and his 7 councillors who abet him in the outrage. As for myself, I am simply Hopfrog the jester, and this is my last jest." Owing to the high combustibility of both the flax and the tar to which it adhered, the dwarf had scarcely made an end of his brief speech before the work of vengeance was complete. The 8 corpses swung in their chains, a fetid, blackened, hideous, and indistinguishable mass. The cripple hurled his torch at them, clambered leisurely to the ceiling, and disappeared through the skylight. It is supposed to be that Trippetta, stationed on the roof of the saloon, had been the accomplice of her friend in this fiery revenge, and that, together, they effected their escape to their own country, for neither was seen again. Nice. Nice! And then we burned everyone. That story was great. Hopfrog is a wonderful story. All right. So what time is it? 9:45 local time. I guess we could do one more. That should be all right. About an hour and a half of reading of story time. That's not bad. So let's see. What did I want to read? One of the ones that I know of that I haven't read myself. And let me tell you, the episode of Fall of the House of Usher that featured the Pit and the Pendulum. So satisfying. All right, so titles. This is from 1850 once again. The Pit and the Pendulum. This one's a classic. It is a classic. All right. So let's see. I know this is about the Inquisition. A story of a man that attempts to survive the Spanish Inquisition, one of the most deadly inquisitions in history. This isn't really a horror story, it's more of a suspenseful thriller. Did you know the Spanish Inquisition ended during Poe's lifetime? We tend to think it happened in the Middle Ages, but torturing people because they weren't converted to Christianity officially ended in 1834, when Poe was 25 years old. Well, heck. Okay. Alright, just clearing some stuff. Yeah. Alright. This is just going to be me doing a very bad... There are a lot of things one might not expect about the Spanish Inquisition, I know. Let's see, what bullshit voice are we going to try today? This is just practice for bad voice stuff. This is what this is. This is just me be like a bad Diego Luna. That's what this is. Alright, one of the famous ones. It's about as long as the last one. Let's see what happens. This is The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe, published 1850. Please replay the playlist. Impia totorum longos hic turba furores sanguinis innocui non satiata aluit. Sospite nunc patria, fracto nunc funeres antro, mors ubi dira fuit, vita salusque patent. Quatrain composed for the gates of the market to be erected upon the site of the Jacobin Club house at Paris. I was sick unto death with that long agony, and when they at length unbound me, and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dread sentence of death, was the last of distinct accentuation which reached my ears. After that, the sound of inquisitorial voices emerged in one dreamy, indeterminate hum. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from its association in fancy with the burr of a mill wheel. This only for a brief period, for presently I heard no more. Yet, for a while I saw, but with how terrible an exaggeration. I saw the lips of black-robed judges. They appeared to me whiter than the sheet upon which I traced these words, and thin even to grotesqueness, thin with the intensity of their expression of firmness, of immovable resolution, of stern contempt of human torture. I saw that decrees of what to me was fate were still issuing from those lips. I saw them writhe with a deadly locution. I saw them fashion the syllables of my name, and I shuddered because no sound succeeded. I saw, too, for a few moments of delirious horror, the soft and nearly imperceptible waving of the sable draperies which unwrapped the walls of the apartment. And then my vision fell upon the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first they wore the aspect of charity, and seemed white and slender angels who had saved me. But then, all at once, there came a most deadly nausea over my spirit, and I felt every fibre in my frame thrill as if I touched the wire of a galvanic battery, while the angel forms became meaningless spectres, with heads of flame, and I saw that from them there would be no help. And there stole into my fancy, like a rich musical note, the thought of what sweet rest there must be in the grave. The thought came gently and stealthily, and it seemed long before it attained full appreciation. But just as my spirit came at length properly to feel and entertain it, the figures of the judges vanished, as if magically, from before me. The tall candles sank into nothingness. Their flames went out utterly. The blackness of darkness supervened. All sensations appeared swallowed up in a mad rushing descent as the soul into Hades. Then silence and stillness. Night were the universe. I had swooned, but still will not say that all of consciousness was lost. What of it there remained I will not attempt to define or even to describe, yet all was not lost. In the deepest slumber, no, in delirium, no, in a swoon, no, In death? No. Even in the grave, all is not lost. Else there is no immortality for man. Arousing from the most profound of slumbers, we break the gossamer web of some dream. Yet, in a second afterward, so frail may that web have been, we remember not that we have dreamed. In the return to life from the swoon, there are two stages. First, that of the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that of the sense of physical existence. It seems probable that if, upon reaching the second stage, we could recall the impressions of the first, we should find these impressions eloquent in memories of the gulf beyond. And that gulf is what? How at least shall we distinguish its shadows from those of the tomb? But if the impressions of what I have termed the first stage are not, at will, recalled, yet, after a long interval, do they not come unbidden, while we marvel whence they come? He who has never swooned is not he who finds strange palaces and widely familiar faces and coals aglow. Is not he who beholds floating in mid-air the sad visions that the many may not view. Is not he who ponders over the perfume of some novel flower. Is not he whose brain grows bewildered with the meaning of some musical cadence which has never been arrested his attention. Amid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amid earnest struggles to regain some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul has lapsed, there have been moments when I have dreamed of success. There have been brief, very brief periods when I have conjured up remembrances which the lucid reason of a later epoch assures me could have reference only to that condition of seeming unconsciousness. These shadows of memory tell, indistinctly, of tall figures that lifted and bore me in silence down, still down, till a hideous dizziness oppressed me at the mere idea of the interminableness of the descent. That's a big word. They tell also of vague horror at my heart, on account of that heart's unnatural stillness. Then comes a sense of sudden motionlessness throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a ghastly strain, had outrun, in their descent, the limits of the limitless, and paused from the wearisomeness of their toil. After this I call to mind flatness and dampness, and then all is madness, the madness of a memory which busies itself among forbidden things. Very suddenly there came back to my soul and sound, the tumultuous motion of the heart, and in my ears the sound of its beating. Then a pause in which all is blank. Then again sound, and motion, and touch. A tingling sensation pervading my frame. Then the mere consciousness of existence, without thought, a condition which lasted long. Then, very suddenly, thought, and shuddering terror, an earnest endeavor to comprehend my true state. Then a strong desire to lapse into insensibility. Then a rushing revival of soul and a successful effort to move. And now a full memory of the trial, of the judges, of the sable draperies, of the sentence, of the sickness, of the swoon. An entire forgetfulness of all that followed, of all that a later day and much earnestness of endeavor had enabled me vaguely to recall. So far, I had not opened my eyes. I felt that I lay upon my back, unbound. I reached out my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. There I suffered it to remain for many minutes, while I strove to imagine where and what I could be. I longed, yet dared not to employ my vision. I dreaded the first glance at objects around me. It was not that I feared to look upon things horrible, but that I grew aghast lest there should be nothing to see. At length, with a wild desperation at heart, I quickly unclosed my eyes. My worst thoughts, then, were confirmed. The blackness of eternal night encompassed me. I struggled for breath. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me. The atmosphere was intolerably close. I still lay quietly, and made effort to exercise my reason. I brought to mind the inquisitorial proceedings, and attempted from that point to deduce my real condition. The sentence had passed, and it appeared to me that a very long interval of time had since elapsed. Yet not for a moment did I suppose myself actually dead. Such a supposition, notwithstanding what we read in fiction, is altogether inconsistent with real existence. But in what state was I? The condemned to death, I knew, perished usually at the autos da fe, and one of these had been held on the very night of the day of my trial. Had I been remanded to my dungeon to await the next sacrifice, which would not take place for many months? This I at once saw could not be. Victims had been in immediate demand. Moreover, my dungeon, as well as all condemned cells at Toledo, had stone floors, and light was not altogether excluded. A fearful idea now suddenly drove the blood in torrents upon my heart, and for a brief period I once more relapsed into insensibility. Upon recovering, I at once started to my feet, trembling convulsively in every fibre. I thrust my arms wildly above and around me in all directions. I felt nothing, yet dreaded to move a step, lest I should be impeded by the walls of a tomb. Perspiration burst from every pore, and stood in cold big beads upon my forehead. The agony of suspense grew at length intolerable, and I cautiously moved forward, with my arms extended and my eyes straining from their sockets, in the hope of catching some faint ray of light. I proceeded for many paces, but still all was a blackness and vacancy. I breathed more freely. It seemed evident that mine was not, at least, the most hideous of fates. And now, as I still continued to step cautiously onward, there came thronging upon my recollection of 1,000 vague rumors of the horrors of Toledo. Of the dungeons there had been strange things narrated, fables I had always deemed them, but yet strange and too ghastly to repeat, save in a whisper. Was I left to perish of starvation in this subterranean world of darkness, or what fate, perhaps even more fearful, awaited me? That the result would be death, and a death more than customary bitterness. I knew too well the character of my judges to doubt. The mode and the hour were all that occupied or distracted me. My outstretched hands at length encountered some solid obstruction. It was a wall, seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping with all the careful distrust with which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however, afforded me no means of ascertaining the dimensions of my dungeon, as I might make its circuit, and return to the point whence I set out, without being aware of the fact. So perfectly uniform seemed the wall. I therefore sought the knife which had been in my pocket, which led into the inquisitorial chamber. But it was gone. My clothes had been exchanged for a wrapper of coarse serge. I had thought of forcing the blade in some minute crevice of the masonry, so as to identify my point of departure. The difficulty, nevertheless, was but trivial, although, in the disorder of my fancy, it seemed at first insuperable. I tore a part of the hem from the robe and placed the fragment at full length, and at right angles of the wall, to the wall. In groping my way around the prison, I could not fail to encounter this rag upon completing the circuit. So at least I thought, but I had not counted upon the extent of the dungeon, or upon my own weakness. The ground was moist and slippery. I staggered onward for some time, when I stumbled and fell. My excessive fatigue induced me to remain prostrate, and sleep soon overtook me as I lay. Upon awakening and stretching forth an arm, I found beside me a loaf and a pitcher with water. I was too much exhausted to reflect upon this circumstance, but ate and drank with avidity. Shortly afterward, I resumed my tour around the prison. With much toil came at last upon the fragment of the serge. Up to the period when I fell, I had counted 52 paces, and upon resuming my walk, I had counted 48 more. When I arrived at the reg, there were in all, then, 100 paces, and admitting 2 paces to the yard, I presumed the dungeon to be 50 yards in circuit. I had met, however, with many angles in the wall, and thus I could form no guess at the shape of the vault. For vault I could not help supposing it to be. I had little object, certainly no hope in these researches, but a vague curiosity prompted me to continue them. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure. At first I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, although seemingly of solid material, was treacherous with slime. At length, however, I took courage, and did not hesitate to step firmly, endeavoring to cross in as direct a line as possible. I had advanced some 10 or 12 paces in this manner, when the remnant of the torn hem of my robe became entangled between my legs. I stepped on it, and fell violently on my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a somewhat startling circumstance which, yet, in a few seconds afterward, and while I still lay prostrate, arrested my attention. It was this. My chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips and the upper portion of my head, although seemingly at less elevation than the chin, touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of decayed fungus arose to my nostrils. I put forward my arm and shuddered to find that I had fallen at the very brink of a circular pit, whose extent, of course, I had no means of ascertaining at the moment. Excuse me. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment, and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I hearkened to its reverberations as it dashed against the sides of the chasm in its descent. At length there was a sullen plunge into water, succeeded by loud echoes. At the same moment there came a sound resembling the quick opening and as rapid closing of a door into overhead, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom and as suddenly faded away. I saw clearly the doom which had been prepared for me, and congratulated myself upon the timely accident by which I had escaped. Another step before my fall, and the world has seen me no more, and the death just avoided was of that very character which I had regarded as... that character which I had regarded as fabulous and frivolous in the tales respecting the Inquisition. To the victims of its tyranny, there was the choice of death with its direst physical agonies, or death with its most hideous moral horrors. I had been reserved for the latter. By long suffering, my nerves had been unstrung, until I trembled at the sound of my own voice, and had become in every respect a fitting subject for the species of torture which awaited me. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall, resolving there to perish rather than risk the terrors of the wells, of which my imagination now pictured many in various positions around the dungeon. In other conditions of mind, I might have had courage to end my misery at once by a plunge into one of these abysses. But now I was the veriest of cowards. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. Agitation of spirit kept me awake for many long hours, but at length I again slumbered. Upon arousing, I found by my side, as before, a loaf and a pitcher of water. A burning thirst consumed me, and I emptied the vessel at a draught. It must have been drugged, for scarcely had I drunk before I became irresistibly drowsy. A deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. How long it lasted, of course, I know not. But when, once again, I unclosed my eyes, the objects around me were visible. By a wild sulphurous luster, the origin of which I could not at first determine, I was enabled to see the extent and aspect of the prison. In its size I had been greatly mistaken. The whole circuit of its walls did not exceed 25 yards. For some minutes this fact occasioned me a world of vain trouble. Vain indeed, for what could be of less importance under my terrible circumstances which environed me than the mere dimensions of my dungeon? But my soul took a wild interest in trifles, and I busied myself in endeavors to account for the error I had committed in my measurement. The truth at length flashed upon me. In my first attempt at exploration, I counted 52 paces, up to the period where I fell. I must then have been within a pace or two of the fragment of serge. In fact, I had nearly performed the circuit of the vault. I then slept, and upon awaking, I must have returned upon my steps, thus supposing the circuit nearly double what it actually was. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I began my tour with the wall to the left, and ended it with the wall to the right. I had been deceived, too, in respect of the shape of this enclosure. In feeling my way, I had found many angles, and thus deduced an idea of great irregularity. So potent is the effect of total darkness upon one arousing from lethargy or sleep. The angles were simply those of a few slight depressions, or niches at odd intervals. The general shape of the prison was square. What I had taken for masonry seemed now to be iron or some other metal, in huge plates, whose sutures or joints occasioned the depression. The entire surface of this metallic enclosure was rudely daubed in all the hideous and repulsive devices to which the charnel superstition of the monks had given rise. The figures of fiends in aspects of menace, with skeleton forms, and other more really fearful images, overspread and disfigured the walls. I observed that the outlines of these monstrosities were sufficiently distinct, but that the colors seemed faded and blurred, as if from the effects of a damp atmosphere. I now noticed the floor, too, which was of stone. In the center yawned the circular pit from whose jaws I had escaped, but it was the only one in the dungeon. All this I saw indistinctly and by much effort, for my personal condition had been greatly changed during the slumber. I now lay upon my back, and at full length, on a species of low framework of wood. To this I was securely bound by a long strap resembling a surcingle. It passed in many convolutions about my limbs and body, leaving at liberty only my head and my left arm to such extent that I could, by dint of much exertion, supply myself with food from an earthen dish which lay by my side on the floor. I saw to my horror that the pitcher had been removed. To say to my horror, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. This thirst it appeared to be the design of my persecutors to stimulate, for the food in the dish was meat pungently seasoned. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet overhead, and constructed as much as the side walls. In one of its panels, a very singular figure riveted my whole attention. It was the painted figure of Time, as he is commonly represented, save that, in lieu of a scythe, he held what, at a casual glance, supposed to be the pictured image of a huge pendulum, such as we see on antique clocks. There was something, however, in the appearance of this machine which caused me to regard it more attentively. While I gazed directly upward at it, for its position was immediately over my own, I fancied that I saw it in motion, and in an instant afterward the fancy was confirmed. Its sweep was brief, and of course slow. Paul, hello! We're halfway through a story. We're tied to a table. There's a pendulum above us. Oh, how you doing, sir? How you doing? I'm like hanging on by a thread. I got really sleepy. I wonder. Maybe. We're gonna find out. Luckily, there are several. There are at least 2 adults here. Oh no.
My headphones disconnected.
No.
For a sec.
Ha. That's funny. Where are we? Huge pendulum. There was something, however, in the appearance of this machine which caused me to regard it more attentively. While I gazed directly upward at it, for its position was immediately over my own, I fancied that I saw it in motion. In an instant afterward, the fancy was confirmed. Its sweep was brief and, of course, slow. I watched it for some minutes, somewhat in fear, but more in wonder. Wearied at length with observing its dull movement, I turned my eyes upon the other objects in the cell. A slight noise attracted my notice, and looking to the floor, I saw several enormous rats traversing it. They had issued from the well, which lay just within view to my right. Even then, while I gazed, they came up in troops, hurriedly, with ravenous eyes, allured by the scent of the meat. From this it required much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time, before I again cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased in extent by nearly a yard. As a natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was the idea that had perceptibly descended. I now observed, with what horror it is needless to say, that its nether extremity was formed of a crescent of glittering steel, about a foot in length from horn to horn, the horns upward, and the under edge evidently as keen as that of a razor. Like a razor, also, it seemed massy and heavy, tapering from the edge into a solid and broad structure above. It was appended to a weighty rod of brass, and the whole hissed as it swung through the air. I could no longer doubt the room prepared for me by monkish ingenuity in torture. My cognizance of the pit had become known to be the inquisitorial agents. The pit, whose horrors had been destined for so bold a recusant as myself. The pit, typical of hell, regarded by rumor as the ultimate tool of all their punishments. The plunge into this pit had avoided by the merest of accidents. I knew that surprise, or entrapment into torment, formed an important portion of all the grotesquerie of these dungeon deaths. Having failed to fall, it was no part of the demon plan to hurl me into the abyss, and thus, there being no alternative, a different and milder destruction awaited me. Milder! I half smiled in my agony as I thought of such application of such a term. What boots it to tell of the long, long hours of horror more than mortal, during which I counted the rushing vibrations of the steel, inch by inch, line by line, with the descent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages. Down, and still down it came. Days passed. It might have been that many days passed, ere it swept so closely over me as to fan me with its wild, acrid breath. The odor of the sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. I prayed. I wearied heaven with my prayer for its more speedy descent. I grew frantically mad, and struggled to force myself upward against the sweep of this fearful scimitar. And then I fell suddenly calm, and lay smiling at the glittering death, as a child some rare bauble. There was another interval of utter insensibility. It was brief, for, upon again lapsing into life, there is no perceptible descent into the pendulum. But it might have been long, for I knew there were demons who took note of my swoon, who could have arrested the vibration at pleasure. Upon my recovery, too, I felt very, inexpressibly sick and weak, as if through long inanition. Even amid the agonies of that period, my left arm was as far as my bonds permitted, and took possession of the small remnant which had been spared me by the rats. As I put a portion of it within my lips, there rushed to my mind a half-formed thought of joy, of hope, but felt also that it had perished in its formation. In vain I struggled to regain it. Long suffering had nearly annihilated all my ordinary powers of mind. I was an imbecile, an idiot. The vibration of the pendulum was at right angles to my length. I saw that the crescent was designed to cross the region of the heart. It would fray the serge of my robe. It would return and repeat its operations. Again. And again. Notwithstanding terrifically wide sweep, some 30 feet or more, and the hissing vigor of its descent, sufficient to sunder these very walls of iron, still the fraying of my rope would be all that, for several minutes, it would accomplish. And at this thought I paused. I dared not go farther than this reflection. I dwelt upon it with the pertinacity of attention, as if, in so dwelling, I could arrest here the descent of the steel. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of the crescent as it should pass across the garment, upon the peculiar thrilling sensation which the friction of cloth produces on the nerves. I pondered upon all this frivolity until my teeth were on edge. Have you read The Raven yet? Not tonight. I have read The Raven before, many times. I did a presentation about it in high school, like grade 10. I wouldn't mind reading it again just because I probably appreciate it a lot better now. This is what I realized while watching The Fall of the House of Usher, is that I didn't understand what a bust of Pallas was back then. Now I do. So, anyways, we're on ad, so I'm gonna wait for a second for Mr. David there. Four more days before Spooderman. I still need to deal with my PlayStation. I need to fix it still. Fuck me. Alright, where are we? Ponder upon the frivolity until the teeth were on edge. Down. Steadily down it crept. I took a frenzied pleasure in contrasting its downward with its lateral velocity. To the right. To the left. Far and wide. With the shriek of a damned spirit. To my heart with the stealthy pace of the tiger. I alternately laughed and howled as one or the other idea grew predominant. Down. Certainly, relentlessly down. It vibrated within 3 inches of my bosom. I struggled violently, furiously, to free my left arm. This was free only from the elbow to the hand. I could reach the latter from the platter beside me to my mouth with great effort, but no farther. Could I have broken the fastenings above the elbow? I would have seized and attempted to arrest the pendulum. I might as well have attempted to arrest an avalanche. Shawty got low. 6 chapters in, 24 to go. Oh, 30 days to read them. Damn, that's a lot. That's a lot, Paul. Down, still unceasingly, still inevitably down. I gasped and struggled at each vibration. I shrunk convulsively at its every sweep. My eyes swallowed its outward or upward whirls with the eagerness of the most unmeaning despair. They closed themselves spasmodically at the descent, although death would have been a relief. Oh, how unspeakable! Still I quivered in every nerve to think how a slight sinking of the machinery would precipitate that keen, glistening axe upon my bosom. It was hope that prompted the nerve to quiver, the frame to shrink. It was hope. The hope that triumphs on the rack, that whispers to the death-condemned, even in the dungeons of the Inquisition. I saw that some 10 or 12 vibrations would bring the steel in actual contact with my robe, and with this observation there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen, collected calmness of despair. For the first time during many hours, or perhaps days, I thought. It now occurred to me that the bandage, or circumcision, which enveloped me, was unique. I was tied by no separate cord. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent athwart any portion of the band would so detach it that it might have been unwound from my person by means of my left hand. But how fearful in that case were the proximity of the steel? The result of the slightest struggle, how deadly! Was it likely, moreover, that the minions of the torture had not foreseen and provided for this possibility? Was it probable that the bandage crossed my bosom in the track of the pendulum? Dreading to find my faint, and, as it seemed, in my last hope, frustrated, I so far elevated my head as to obtain a distinct view of my breast. The circumcision enveloped my limbs, and my body closed in all directions, save in the path of destroying crescent. Scarcely had I dropped my head back into its original position, when there flashed upon my mind that I cannot better describe than as the unformed half of that idea of deliverance to which I had previously alluded, and of which a moiety of only floated indeterminately through my brain when I raised food to my burning lips. The whole thought was now present, feeble, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. I proceeded at once, with the nervous energy of despair, to attempt its execution. For many hours, the immediate vicinity of the low framework upon which I lay had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as if they waited for motionlessness on my part to make their prey. To what food, I thought, had they been accustomed in the wild? They had devoured, in spite of all my efforts to prevent them, all but a small remnant of the contents of the dish. I had fallen into a habitual seesaw, or wave of the hand about the platter, and, at length, the unconscious uniformity of the movement deprived it of effect. In their voracity, the vermin frequently fastened their sharp fangs in my fingers. With the particles of the oily and spicy viand which now remained, I thoroughly rubbed the bandage wherever I could reach it. Then, raising my hand from the floor, I lay breathlessly still. At first, the ravenous animals were startled and terrified at the change, at the cessation of movement. They shrank alarmedly back. Many sought the well, but this was only for a moment. I had not counted in vain upon their voracity. Observing that I remained without motion, one or two of the boldest leapt upon the framework and smelt at the circumcision. This seemed the signal for a general rush. Forth from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood. They overran it. They leapt in hundreds upon my person. The measured movement of the pendulum disturbed them not at all. Avoiding its strokes, they busied themselves with the anointed bandage. They pressed. They swarmed upon me in ever-accumulating heaps. They writhed upon my throat. Their cold lips sought my own. I was half stifled by their thronging pressure. Disgust, for which the world has no name, swelled my bosom, and chilled, with a heavy clamminess, my heart. Yet 1 minute, and I felt that struggle would be over. Plainly, I perceived the loosening of the bandage. I knew that in more than one place it must already be severed. With more than human resolution, I lay still. Nor had I erred in my calculations, nor had I endured in vain. I at length felt that I was free. The circingel hung in ribbons from my body, but the stroke of the pendulum had already pressed upon my bosom. It had divided the serge of the robe. It had cut through the linen beneath. Twice again it swung, and a sharp sense of pain shot through every nerve. But the moment of escape had arrived. At a wave of my hand, my deliverers hurried the tumultuous away. With a steady movement, cautious, sidelong, shrinking and slow, I slid from the embrace of the bandage and beyond the reach of the scimitar. For the moment, at least, I was free. Free! And in the grasp of the Inquisition! I had scarcely stepped from my wooden bed of horror upon the stone floor of the prison when the motion of the hellish machine ceased and I beheld it drawn up by some invisible force through the ceiling. This was the lesson which I took desperately to heart. My every motion was undoubtedly watched. Free! I had but escaped death in one form of agony, to be delivered unto worse than death in some other. With that thought, I rolled my eyes nervously around on the barriers of iron that hemmed me in. Something unusual. Some change which, at first, I could not appreciate distinctly. It was obvious, had taken place in the apartment. For many minutes of a dreamy and trembling abstraction, I busied myself in vain, unconnected conjecture. During this period, I became aware, for the first time, of the origin of the sulphurous light which illumined the cell. It proceeded from a fissure about half an inch in width, extending entirely around the prison at the base of the walls, which thus appeared, and were, completely separated from the floor. I endeavored, but of course in vain, to look through the aperture. As I rose from the attempt, the mystery of the altercation in the chamber broke at once upon my understanding. I have observed that, although the outlines of the figures upon the walls are sufficiently distinct, yet the colors seem blurred and indefinite. These colors had now assumed, and were momentarily assuming, a startling and most intense brilliancy that gave to the spectral and fiendish portraitures an aspect that might have thrilled even firmer nerves than my own. Demon eyes, of a wild and ghastly vivacity, glared upon me in 1,000 directions, where none had been visible before, and gleamed with the lurid luster of a fire that could not force my imagination to regard as unreal. Unreal! Even while I breathed, there came to my nostrils the breath of the vapor of heated iron. A suffocating odor pervaded the prison. A deeper glow settled each moment in the eyes that glared at my agonies. A richer tint of crimson diffused itself over the pictured horrors of blood. I panted. I gasped for breath. There could be no doubt of the design of my tormentors. Oh, most unrelenting. Oh, most demoniac of men. I shrunk from the glowing metal to the center of the cell. Amid the thought of the fiery destruction that impended, the idea of the coolness of the well came over my soul like balm. I rushed to its deadly brink. I threw my straining vision below. The glare from its enkindled roof illumined its inmost recesses. Yet, for a moment, did my spirit refuse to comprehend the meaning of what I saw. At length, it wrestled its way into my soul. It burned itself in upon my shuddering reason. Oh, for a voice to speak. Ah, horror. Ah, any horror but this. With a shriek, I rushed from the margin and buried my face in my hands, weeping bitterly. The heat rapidly increased, and once again I looked up, shuddering with a fit of the ague. There had been a second change in the cell, and now the change was obviously in the form. As before, it was in vain that I, at first, endeavored to appreciate or understand what was taking place. But not long was I left in doubt. The inquisitorial vengeance had been hurried by my twofold escape, and there was to be no more dallying with the King of Terrors. Hey. Where was I? Twofold escape, no dallying with the King of Terrors. Yeah. Oh, the King of Terrors. The room had been square. I saw that 2 of its iron angles were now acute. 2, consequently, obtuse. The fearful difference quickly increased with a low rumbling or moaning sound. In an instant, the apartment had shifted its form into that of a lozenge. But the altercation stopped not here. I neither hoped nor desired for it to stop. I could have clasped the red walls of my bosom as a garment of eternal peace. Death, I said. Any death but that of the peat. Fool. Might I not have known that into the pit it was the object of the burning iron to urge me? Could I resist its glow? Or even that, could I withstand its pressure? And now, flatter and flatter grew the lozenge, with a rapidity that left me no time for contemplation. Its center, and of course its greatest width, came just over the yawning gulf. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me resistlessly onward. At length, for my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found the vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. I felt that I tottered upon the brink. I averted my eyes. There was a discordant hum of human voices. There was a loud blast as many trumpets. There was a harsh grating as of 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own as I fell, fainting into the abyss. It was that of General LaSalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies. Damn. So just bro gets saved at the last minute. Lucky. All right. Well, that is at least 2 hours of reading. I think we are good for now. You know what I might do is possibly on the Wednesday, depending on how alive I am, maybe at that point I will start Vlad's Circus, the game that I want to play. If you guys remember the Nine Witches Family Disruption that I played last year, or maybe it was earlier this year actually, it was hilarious and I really enjoyed it. And apparently they're making a spookier one soon about like a circus clown. So we're probably going to check that out maybe on Wednesday, maybe on Thursday, maybe on Friday. I don't know. We'll see. Everyone is away from home right now. So backstory to my comment. Oh, yes. Yeah, count. What are we reading? 6 chapters in, 24 to go, 30 days to read them in. What are you trying to finish in time for 30 days to read them in? What are you up to, Paul? While you set that up. Yeah, it is spooky times, but it is also my busy work season, and my schedule could be a little bit messy and a little bit fucky because of that, so we'll see what happens. I should be okay for the Mondays and all that still, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. Wednesday, if I do stream, like I said, we'll see how dead I am, because that morning I actually have some Star Wars shit that I need to do. I need to entertain children before they get to go to Disneyland with a program called Dreams Take Flight. So that'll be fun. It's like a 2:30 a.m. call though, so I gotta be in like the airport at like 2:30. So that's wild. And after that, we'll see what I do. So yeah, for those of you who swung by to say hi and to take a listen, thank you for coming by. Edgar Allan Poe is definitely on my mind ever since watching The Fall of the House of Usher. It's on Netflix right now. I really, really liked it, so I can recommend. I was Songbirds and Snakes last week and discovered the movie's coming out. I want to finish the book before I see the movie. That's cool. I can appreciate that. I definitely did that with Lord of the Rings. I was like, I need to read this first. And I did. I just clinched it. Yeah, that's cool. So, yeah, so we'll see. So other than that, What do we got for the rest of the week? Thursday morning, that should be Colston. Colston has a poll up on the Discord. So if you guys go into the Discord, you can vote on what game Colston plays next. Because apparently he just finished Armored Core 6. Damn. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, don't expect too much. Joyce and Arash are out of town. Ash still dealing with Ashy stuff. And me, we'll see. I don't really intend to pick up extra time. I'm gonna be pretty wiped most of this week. I didn't caffeine up. That's my mistake. That's what I did wrong. I had to cook today. It was delicious. It was fine. Not important. So yeah, it's gonna be kind of a light week. Just keep tabs on our socials, and we'll let you know when we stream. Just because we're all over the place right now. So yeah, we'll leave it at that. October is a fun month. I hope you guys have fun. I hope you enjoy Halloween. Paul, you should do Halloween stuff, even though it's not really a thing in Australia yet. We can fix that. We can make this better. But yeah, you guys all have a good night. Daring Player Squad, 5 people who mostly play video games. Sometimes we read stuff because it's funny. But yeah, that's what we're up to. And I guess we're done here. Let's sign us off. Speaking of Dreamsake Flight, I do need to iron a whole lot of costume right now because I'm not going to have time to do it tomorrow. So I guess I'll do that. Thank you for listening. I hope you had fun. My name is James. We're the Daring Player Squad. And once again, enjoy the Halloween intro. Good night. This is gonna be a fucking dragon or something. Oh, fuck no! Fuck!
Oh no! What is happening?
Oh god! Oh god! Oh god! Oh god! Oh god! It's coming for me! It's coming for me!
He got the strap.
So he was fighting off something in the fucking thing.
Comes back alive. That's right when I started talking.
Ah!
Oh no! What? Why are you leaving?
Holy shit!
Ah! Jesus fucking Christ!
This is fucking roll. Like, this is.